Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Christa Carmen.
And this is...
Murder Coaster.
Step right up, step right up. Approchez, mon chat. Today, the Murder Coaster will be taking a ride down south to New Orleans, Louisiana, the city that care forgot the Big Easy for a brutal and mind-numbingly disturbing love story like no other. Laissez les bon temps rouler. Let the good times roll.
Let's begin. Prologue. Love in a Hurricane. Addie Hall and Zach Bowen found love during the catastrophe of Hurricane Katrina. Addie was a poet, dancer, and seamstress. Zack, a musician, magician, and Army combat veteran, having served in both Kosovo and Iraq. They were both free spirits who made a living bartending in the famously wild saloons of the Big Easy, living the bohemian lifestyle of New Orleans' French Quarter.
Though they were both transplants to New Orleans, Zach from California and Addie from North Carolina, they'd become symbols of the Big Easy in many ways. In the wake of Katrina's devastation, the breaching of the levees and the flooding of the city, they became the image of resilience, staying in the city they loved, defying orders to leave, being featured in Time magazine, Gawker, the Mobile Register, even making the front page of the New York Times. Under the headline, "Holdouts on dry ground say, why leave now?"
Photographs of them in the ravished and abandoned city abounded, making cocktails on a rickety wooden table, both lithe, young, and good-looking. Addie in a bikini top, long blonde hair streaming down her back, wild, passionate eyes, star-framed sunglasses perched on her head. Zack shirtless, smoking a cigarette, looking contemplative and serene.
Another photograph shows them holding each other in their arms, gazing longingly into each other's eyes. Zack, tall and lanky, in a t-shirt inscribed Army. Addie, with her hair in braids, dressed all in black, with a black handkerchief tied across her head.
They'd ride their bicycles out through the devastation of the storm, holding hands as they cycled past fallen trees ripped out by their roots and corpses stuffed in shopping carts. In the wee hours of the morning, as dawn approached and night began to fade, the deserted city, once notorious for its nightlife, now deserted and eerily silent, they'd make love right there in the middle of the street. Why not?
Zack told a reporter from the Mobile Register, "It's actually kind of nice. We're living the good life. I've got a camp stove and lots of cans of beans, and I broke into a bunch of bars and stole all the booze. We're bartenders, so we're well stocked."
And in true New Orleans fashion, Addie would flash her breasts at police and emergency vehicles, ensuring they'd come back and their neighborhood would be regularly patrolled.
Theirs was a famous love story of wild New Orleans, young artists and free spirits, French Quarter bohemians who found love in the destruction of a hurricane. But a year later, after the city began to recover and come back to a semblance of normality, it all came literally crashing down when, on October 17th, 2006, Zack leapt off the roof of the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel plummeting 5 stories and slamming to his death onto the roof of the parking garage.
Detectives from the New Orleans Police Department gathered, surprised how intact the corpse was after such a long fall, his eyes half shut, as if serenely thinking. The coroner investigator arrived and began to examine the body, and found a Ziploc bag in his front right pocket.
Inside the bag were Zach's military dog tags and a sheet of folded notebook paper, reading, "For police only."
The coroner unfolded the paper and began to read aloud. "This is not accidental. I had to take my own life to pay for the one I took. If you send a patrol to 826 North Rampart, you will find the dismembered corpse of my girlfriend. The keys in my right front pocket are for the gates."
The police, thinking the coroner was pulling a prank, joking with them, laughed at first. Then one of them growled, "Give me that," pulling the note from the coroner's hands and reading it themselves. It was no joke.
The apartment was on the top floor of a Creole cottage built in 1829, perched right above the voodoo spiritual temple run by priestess Miriam Chimani, who'd presided over the marriage of Nicolas Cage and Lisa Marie.
So fucking New Orleans, man.
Investigators swung open the black wrought iron gate which led to the courtyard, then descended up the steps into the small apartment that looked out over Jackson Square and the so very Southern Gothic St. Louis Cathedral.
The apartment was trashed. Cigarette butts, beer cans, empty whiskey bottles, piled up so you couldn't even see the surface of the tables. Stacks of boxes and junk everywhere. The air conditioner was blaring, set on high. The apartment like a refrigerator. Spray painted across the wall were the words, "I'm a total failure."
There were numerous cryptic messages spray-painted about. Above the bed was written, "Please stop the pain."
Another message read, "Call my wife," followed by a phone number.
In the kitchen, scrawled on the wall, were the messages, "I love her. Look in the oven," with a large arrow pointing to the stove.
Inside the oven were Addie's legs, stuffed into a tinfoil turkey pan and charred a deep black, coated in Cajun seasoning.
And on the stovetop, in a large pot that once probably boiled crawfish, was the head of Addie Hall, her long blonde hair poking free around the edges. Another pot on the back burner held her hands and feet, and inside the refrigerator was her torso wrapped in a blood-soaked garbage bag.
One New Orleans Police Department officer would say,
"I couldn't conceive of what happened there. In 10 years of law enforcement, I have never seen anything that disturbing."
Story went viral. Newspapers, bloggers, news shows around the world picking up on it and saying absolutely crazy bullshit. Saying Zack had been possessed by a demon from the voodoo temple below them, and the body cooked as part of a voodoo ritual. That Zack had committed war atrocities and was a notorious cannibal. None of which was true, all of it nonsense. But the press were having a field day, and everyone wondered how Zachary Bowen, a former Army sergeant, veteran of 2 wars, Kosovo and Iraq, beloved bartender known for performing magic tricks for patrons, a musician and part of the French Quarter delivery man community, could murder and dismember the woman he called his true love and soulmate. Just what happened?
Well, we do know much of what happened, in grisly detail in fact, for Zack left a detailed written confession in Addie's journal.
Ladies and gentlemen, we bring you the story of Addie Hall and Zachary Bowen.
Chapter 1. Zack from Bakersfield. Zachary Morgan Bowen was born May 15, 1978, in Bakersfield, California. His parents, Lori and Jack, were California hippies.
Zach's dad, Jack and Zach, that had to be confusing. Well, Jack, the dad, had grown up in Redondo Beach with surfer culture, working as a bellhop and dreaming of one day taking off and traveling. He had that beatnik urge to just keep moving, a lust for life.
Zach's mom, Lori, was a true blue Southern California girl who spent her youth protesting the Vietnam War and going to Led Zeppelin and Jethro Tull concerts. She, too, dreaming of being a free spirit and wandering the country like a gypsy.
After a whirlwind romance, they got married in 1972, settling in Bakersfield for some reason. Not that there's anything wrong with Bakersfield, it's just pretty conservative and not near the coast.
Their first child, Jed, was born in 1975. Then came Zack.
After Zach was born, they finally decided to follow their dream of traveling, packing everything up into a Volkswagen van, such hippies, and headed up into Idaho. Interesting choice. Then back down into California, but this time to the eastern central part, to Chico, nestled in the Sacramento Valley in the Sierra Nevada foothills, a very cool college town. I love Chico, but it's very hot.
Jack started attending classes at Chico State with the dream of being a speech and drama teacher, and received a BA in drama, then started the teaching program, but ended up clashing with his professors and decided to head back to Bakersfield.
In Bakersfield, Jack worked for an oil company for a while, but he hated it, soon quit, finding work as a bartender for a strip club, which is a bold move. I can't imagine Lori would be too thrilled in that. What would you do if your husband said he quit his job to become a bartender at a strip club?
I don't think he'd ever say that because he would fear my wrath. Then Jack found a job at an oil drilling company in Ojai, but Jack and Lori still suffered from wanderlust and ended up taking a vacation in Whidbey Island in Puget Sound, 30 miles north of Seattle, and decided they loved it there and weren't leaving.
They were attracted to the thriving hippie community. There were art festivals and music, all kinds of fun freaks. But soon, Jack was partying hard with their new friends, staying out all night. Jack and Lori started fighting, and in 1990, Lori decided she'd had enough and left Jack, taking 12-year-old Zach and 14-year-old Jed back down to California and settling in Santa Maria.
Chapter 2. Homecoming King.
Zach and Jed were forming their distinct personalities as they came into their teenage years. Zach was all about grunge and heavy metal, Metallica being his favorite band. He was goofy and a jokester, but a little shy and introverted. He'd gone through a huge growth spurt, was well over 6 foot tall, and wearing a size 17 shoe.
Damn. Jed was all about hip-hop and rap music, and was more serious, less ready to smile, radiating an intensity that contrasted with Zach's laid-backness.
The boys went to Santa Maria High School, and Zach started playing the drums, getting really into music, learning guitar as well. And, I don't know, this is weird to me. He became obsessed with being the homecoming king. which I don't get. He's an outsider, not part of the preppy SoCal cliques. He's this really tall, awkward, skinny guy with long hair in a Metallica shirt. But he had his heart set on being the homecoming king. He went for it.
So on Friday, November 3rd, 1995, Zack went out to the football field with the other candidates to state his case for why he should be chosen, wearing a cape. Yup, he wore a long, flowing black cape.
Interesting choice, cape. I mean, I personally have like 5 or 6 very nice capes and a few hooded cloaks as well. But I was never homecoming queen, just a gothy nerd.
You were never homecoming queen? I mean, you can go for that too if you want, but...
Is that a Freudian slip?
I don't know. Maybe you always wanted to carry White some ass. But she was the prom queen, sorry. Now we're all mixed up. Prom queens, homecoming kings.
But I was never But I was never homecoming king. Just a gothy nerd obsessed with vampires.
Zack was introduced by the MC as, quote, a senior who plans on making a career out of music, end quote, and was then asked to make a speech.
The other candidates had given serious speeches about the importance of school spirit and education, but Zack got up there, 6'10", in a cape, awkwardly grabbed the microphone and said, the school should have mandatory 2-hour nap periods.
Interesting choice. It didn't win him over to the judges, who announced that Jay Robbins would be the homecoming king and April Sharp the queen.
Wah, wah, wah.
Zack was completely crushed, devastated to have had his hopes dashed.
Do you remember who else was crushed by not being high school royalty? Charlie Manson girl Leslie Van Houten. She'd been the homecoming queen twice, and when she didn't make it the third time, she got totally pissed off and ran away, going to Haight Street in San Francisco, dropping acid, and seeing the Grateful Dead.
And this is very similar. Zack was apparently so devastated, he dropped out of Santa Maria High School and moved back up to Washington to Whidbey Island to live with his dad.
He literally quit school and ran away because he wasn't made homecoming king. That's something.
Yeah. Jack and Lori's divorce had been quite bitter, so Lori was obviously a little miffed that Zack was leaving California to go live with his dad, who'd always acted more like a buddy to his sons than a parent or role model, and was more or less absent from their lives.
And old Jack hadn't changed at all. He was still itching for travel, to be on the road. So as soon as Zack arrived, they hit the road, driving all the way across the country and dead south into Savannah, Georgia, partying it up, and then on to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for spring break. They literally went to spring break in Fort Lauderdale, which, in my opinion, is a weird father-son trip, but, to each their own.
Then they cruised on over to New Orleans, the Big Easy.
Chapter 3, The Big Easy. There was just something about New Orleans that both Jack and Zach fell in love with. The warm southern hospitality, music blaring from open doors, impromptu brass bands marching down the street, musicians on every corner, the colorful and unique architecture, the food, and especially the alcohol culture. So Jack rented them a rundown apartment and started bartending, a job he often fell back on.
That's pretty wild. Zach is 17, and he and his dad just go on this epic road trip adventure across the entire country and end up in New Orleans and on a whim decide to just live there for a while. It's pretty crazy.
It's kind of cool. I don't know.
No, yeah, cool, but a little wild.
Yeah, it's wild, yeah. Zach enrolled in high school, and if he thought he was an outsider in Southern California, he was in for a big surprise in New Orleans. And he soon dropped out. It was just a completely different world. They probably thought his accent was as weird as he thought theirs was. Just a completely different culture.
Yat is what the New Orleans accent is called, a combination of French, Irish, German, Italian, and various African and Native American languages, all topped off with a down-home southern twang.
They got the deep south lazy draw. Nolans. Okay, we'll try to give you a very quick summary of New Orleans, but remember, we're not historians. We are by no means experts on New Orleans. We're just storytellers, setting the scene. So if we get anything wrong or mispronounce anything, please don't come at us.
Here we go. New Orleans was founded in 1718 by the French trading company Campania. Isn't company
Compagnie?
company?
Compagnie?
Doesn't that word mean company, though?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. New Orleans was founded in 1718 by the French trading company Compagnie d'Occident, run by a Scottish
I think
gambler.
it's Compagnie, isn't it?
Compagnie? This is French, though?
Yeah, is that not right? I don't know. Do you speak French at all?
I took it. I don't...
Okay.
I feel
So-
like...
Is it Compagnie? I just want to say everything with like this big flourish. I don't know. Compagnie d'Occident. Compagnie d'Occident. Oh, escargot.
It's literally pronounced Compagnie
Okay.
d'Occident. Compagnie d'Occident, run by a Scottish gambler named John Law, who built the city on swampy land beside a crescent-shaped bend in the Mississippi River.
In order to populate the city, in 1714, French criminals were rounded up and exiled to New Orleans. Convicted prostitutes and women with the fleur de lis branded on their shoulders, as well as, quote, tobacco smugglers, thieves, beggars, vagabonds, orphans, the unemployed, the incorrigible, the vicious, and the depraved, end quote, were some of the first to settle there in the Crescent City.
John Law then exaggerated all the assets of this colony in a swamp populated by French criminals and sold it at inflated prices and fled France in 1721 for Venice, Italy, where he squandered his fortune gambling.
In 1763, New Orleans was ceded to the Spanish, who, after a terrible fire wiped out many of the structures, built back with much of the iconic architecture we associate the city with today, including the black wrought iron balconies.
In 1802, the city briefly went back to France before all of Louisiana and much of the Midwest was purchased by the United States in 1803.
Despite now being part of the United States, New Orleans and southern Louisiana continued their distinct heritage and languages, including Louisiana French and Corrivigne, or Louisiana Creole, even further developing them and creating whole new Creole cultures.
The term Creole literally means a person raised in one's own home, an expression that came to mean people born in the place they lived. It signifies a meshing of native cultures with colonial settlers. It's used all over, from Alaska to Africa, but it became a blanket expression for people from Louisiana.
Then there's Cajun. So in the 1700s, in what is today Eastern Canada, there was a French colony called Acadia, and the folks there were called Acadians. They were taken over by the British and exiled in the 1750s and 60s, settling throughout the Atlantic seaboard. And a whole mess of them ended up going down the Mississippi River and into Louisiana, where they established Nouvelle Acadia, or New Acadia.
The first group of 200 Acadians arrived in Louisiana on February 27, 1765, aboard the Santo Domingo, and settled into the swamps, learning to survive off land rich with an abundance of seafood, game, crawfish, oysters, catfish, white-tailed deer, their French language slowly changing into a whole new dialect.
It wasn't until 100 years later, during the Civil War, when the Union took over New Orleans, that the term Cajun came to be. And it was basically a mispronunciation of Acadia and Acadians.
The first written account of the word Cajun was in 1863 by Lieutenant George C. Harding of the 21st Indiana Infantry, who said, quote,
"I will try and tell what a Cajun is. He is a half-savage creature of mixed French and Indian blood, who lives in swamps and subsists by cultivating small patches of corn and sweet potatoes."
Afterwards, Cajun was a slur for a long time. The term Creole became synonymous with the upper class, the aristocrats and bourgeois, who would refer to the peasants and lower class as Cajuns. It wasn't until the 1950s that people started using the term in a positive manner. And it wasn't until 1980 that the Cajun people were recognized as an actual ethnicity. And people still argue over the actual differences between Creole and Cajun and what each means.
I went down a weird Cajun rabbit hole. I ended up stumbling on this guy who makes Swamp the Table cooking videos named Stale Cracker. You ever see his videos on TikTok or Reels?
I don't think so. Doesn't sound familiar.
This guy is a character. He's a big old Cajun dude, and he hunts alligators and frogs and shows how to butcher them and make them into po' boys. He's got his own crawfish farm, and he sends them out live all across the country. And he has his own line of seasonings, Cajun two-step. He's got gator drool and rougarou juice. Yeah, he's even got a hot sauce named after the Louisiana werewolf. How cool is that?
I want that.
I know, right? Right?
Yeah.
You know, I love gumbo, etouffee, jambalaya, crawfish. So I was like sold. And I'm going to make shrimp and fish etouffee this weekend using his recipes and his own spices. I'm tempted to get the crawfish, but we got good crawfish right here in California. You like crawfish? Eat them?
I only really had them once. I mean, I'm in New England, so we just eat regular lobster.
Right.
But I've had them. Yeah, they're good. It's just like, again, coming from New England, it's like a lot of work for a much smaller amount of meat.
Yeah, but they suck up that hot sauce.
Yeah, I could definitely. It's been enough time where I should give him another chance.
But anyway, he's got this crazy Cajun accent. I think he actually plays it up and makes it bigger than it is. But he's always throwing in all kinds of French in there, like "ça c'est bon," and he calls folks couillons, which is a French word for asshole, but in Cajun, couillon just means like a crazy fool. He pronounces oil Earl. Just Earl. I guess that's very common there. And onions or onions, lemons, lemons. And he makes huge feasts for hundreds of people with like 100-gallon pots of jambalaya and bushels of crawfish. And he gets completely wasted the whole time doing shots of whiskey called Redneck Riviera. And he's shotgunning beers. Crazy character. I love this guy. I can't help it.
I gotta check it out. Although Zach dropped out of high school, he really took to New Orleans, especially the bar scene in the French Quarter. New Orleans has a drinking and alcohol culture. You can walk around with an open container of alcohol, even drive with a drink in your hand. And at just 18 years old, Zach, just like his old man, gets a job serving drinks at a bar on Bourbon Street.
And Bourbon Street is just a big old party. And Zach sold to-go cups through a window to tourists on the street. I'm a sucker for all that shit. I've bought loads of hand grenades. You know, those drinks in plastic containers shaped like hand grenades.
Yeah.
So touristy and cheesy, but I just can't help
fun,
myself.
though.
Totally, right? I was once there with all these hippies and gutter punks, and we were asking people to, like, spare a swill. Like, just dump a little bit of your drink in our cup, which everyone did happily. And there was folks up in balconies, and we asked them to pour drinks down into our cups and even into our open mouths. They totally did. Throwing beads and weird plastic toys at us. This wasn't even Mardi Gras. This is like a normal day.
It's just a normal day. So Zach's hanging out the window of this bar, yelling to tourists, "Who wants a shot of Jack?" Pouring drinks, slugging them down himself. And that's when Lena Shapak, a 28-year-old exotic dancer from Houston, Texas, came strutting by.
Lena and her friend were on vacation, looking to party. And Zach set them up with some Jägermeister shots, and the girls thought he'd make a, quote, good toy for the next couple days.
Lena was gorgeous and made a lot of money stripping at Caligula 21 in Houston, thousands of dollars a night. And she loved to travel, often paying for her trips by stopping in at various nightclubs to perform, going to Myrtle Beach every spring for golf season.
I guess golfers love strip clubs. She'd been married once, a marriage she called, quote, very volatile, very violent, very crazy. After leaving her husband, she hid out in Mexico City for a while, but had to flee after being accused of gun running, headed back to Texas.
But she hated Texas and was hearing good things about New Orleans, so she and her friend headed to the Big Easy to give it a look-see, meeting Zach their very first night there.
Lena dug New Orleans. It was her kind of town. So she found an apartment and she got a job at Big Daddy's Bottomless Topless on Bourbon Street. This place is closed now, but was world famous, running for decades. It had an iconic neon sign and these mannequin legs that swung in and out of a window. So as you passed on the street, you saw these legs swinging in and out above you.
Big Daddy's opened in 1967 and was the longest continually running strip club on Bourbon Street when it shut down in 2008.
And I knew a guy who was a bouncer there, this amazing musician. And he listens to the show too, so shout out to Little B. Love you, brother.
For a hot second in 1996, Zach and Lena became nearly inseparable, going out every night until she realized he was only 18. She'd assumed he had to be at least 21. He was serving her drinks when they met, but that's the Big Easy for you.
She was 10 years older than him and had experienced a lifetime of craziness. He was just an innocent little California boy teenager. so she called it off. She didn't want to be a cradle robber.
And then, surprise, she found out she was pregnant, and she was going to keep the baby.
Zach wrote his mother about it all, saying, "Dear Mom, well, the letter I never wanted to write so soon is upon me. This letter is informing you of my unexpected venture into fatherhood. This is what I get for being young and stupid. The mother is a 28-year-old ex-stripper, as of now, who I regret ever meeting. I know this isn't ideal, Mother, and neither of us wanted parenthood, which is why she was on the pill the entire time, but I guess science sometimes fails. I do believe she will make a good mother who will love this child, but I just wish she could have waited for an older, more responsible person. I'm going to stay in New Orleans until the child is born and see through part of its infancy. But in no way will I be its daddy. I know I've screwed up and don't need to hear it from you. Please understand. Love always, Zach."
When Lena went into labor on July 13th, 1997, she didn't even call Zach and let him know. She had a friend call him a few weeks later and tell him that he was the father of a son named Jackson.
But the moment Zach saw his son, he was dedicated to fatherhood. As Lena says,
He was hooked. He would carry Jackson on his shoulders everywhere, and even take the kid into the bar when he was bartending.
which, I don't know, bringing a baby into a New Orleans bar, it doesn't seem like the best parenting choice, but whatever. Zach was all about fatherhood and impressed Lena with his commitment, getting another job bartending at the Pontchartrain Hotel on St. Charles Avenue, a job which provided insurance for both himself and his son, and he even won the most creative drink contest at a French Quarter bar, the prize being a free trip to Belize.
And they moved in together, getting an apartment in the Carlton neighborhood. Then Zach told Lena, if you want health insurance, we need to get married.
So they decided to get married and do it right there in the French Quarter at Jackson Square, beneath the imposing statue of Andrew Jackson on his horse, the Gothic towers of the St. Louis Cathedral in the background, surrounded by tourists who snap pictures of them.
They then honeymooned in Belize. And then Lena told Zach she was pregnant with their second child.
Lily was born June 12th, 1999, and Zach had a reality check. He was a high school dropout, working as a bartender, married to an older ex-stripper, and was now the father of 2.
Feeling trapped and desperate, not wanting his wife to dance naked for strange men again, he decided he needed to make a decisive change in his life. Bartending was not going to cut it, so he got his GED and enlisted in the Army, signing up for an 8-year stint, becoming Private E1 Bowen.
Chapter 4. You're in the Army now. Zach went to a military police school for basic training. He was then sent to Gießen, Germany, joining the 709th Military Police Battalion, which was a fun party in Germany. Zach hanging out at the local bars and showing off his cocktail-making expertise, jamming on the drums and guitar with local musicians.
Then he was deployed to Kosovo for a NATO peacekeeping mission, where he patrolled the city of Kosovo Mitrovica in the back of a Humvee with a machine gun.
That kept the party going in Kosovo, As they patrol, he'd sing Tainted Love by Soft Cell while pounding the beats on the roof. Times I feel I've got to run away.
But it wasn't all fun and game. He was then assigned to uncover mass graves of ethnic Albanians and confront Serbs over the murders.
Yeah, digging up mass graves and confronting the perpetrators definitely put a damper on the party.
At one point, he gave a piece of candy to a little girl, and she was executed for interacting with him. After this, he stopped singing Tainted Love while on patrol.
Cheer him up, Lena would send pictures of her and her friends dancing in the strip clubs, which were all passed around. Eventually, Zach was sent back to Germany, and Lena and the kids moved out there as well. But everyone knew Lena was a crazy stripper at this point, which made things weird. They'd all seen naked pictures of her and her friends, and the other military wives were a little skeptical of her.
Awkward. But if Lena knew how to do anything, it was party and schmooze. And soon they were having a ball, going to bars, getting wild.
And then came September 11th, 2001, and the whole world changed overnight.
Within a year, Congress passed the Authorization for the Use of Military Force Against Iraq Resolution, claiming Saddam Hussein had chemical and biological weapons. Spoiler alert, he didn't. And Zach was being sent to Kuwait.
Chapter 5, Iraq.
Zach agreed with the invasion of Afghanistan and thought Osama bin Laden should be brought to justice. But he was skeptical of the Iraq War, saying all the soldiers knew there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11. It was all just an excuse for war.
Then on March 19th, his entire regiment received a message stating, quote,
"You are about to remove the regime of Saddam Hussein and eliminate the threat of his weapons of mass destruction. He is a brutal dictator whose regime has a history of reckless aggression, ties to terrorism, and a history of using weapons of mass destruction. Your courage will be tested, but you will draw strength from those on your left and right. You will not falter. Trust your instincts, training, and leadership. You are warriors in a historic campaign that will benefit our families, loved ones, as well as the people of Iraq. Strike fast and hard."
The 527th rolled out in armored security vehicles outfitted with 50 caliber machine guns, part of a 250 vehicle convoy through the desert and to the Iraq-Kuwait border, crossing over the border and into Iraq on March 20th.
If Zach thought Kosovo was depressing and demoralizing, he was in for a hell of a shock in Iraq.
After crossing the desert, subsisting on one rationed bottle of water a day, passing the charred remains of Iraqi soldiers killed in airstrikes, they made it to Baghdad.
The company was then assigned to live in the vice president's palace, 20 miles outside of Baghdad in a town called Abu Ghraib. Yes, that Abu Ghraib, which eventually became infamous because of the prisoner abuse and torture.
Zach tried to make the best of it, to have fun when he could. He'd play his guitar and entertain everyone out in the back deck. There was this tight little group: Zach, the musician, Rachel Bosveld, an artist with dreams of being a tattooer, always drawing tattoo flash, and Todd, a lively, fun guy, always with a smile on his lips.
Their job was to rebuild the Iraqi police force, a daunting project as the streets were filled with criminals.
Yeah, on October 20th, 2002, Saddam Hussein had emptied the prisons, and criminals of all sorts were running amok, particularly in Abu Ghraib, which was the, quote, wild west of Iraq.
In the vast open-air markets among the vegetable and rug merchants, gamblers and armed robbers openly sold and traded stolen weapons, and convicts roamed the streets looking to settle old scores. One member of the 527th said,
"There were constant robberies. When people would shoot dice and the game went wrong, there would be a huge gun battle afterward."
The road running down the middle of the market was called the Gauntlet because of so many roadside bombs and IED attacks. As Zach's company would patrol, they'd face small arms fire, rocket-propelled grenades, roadside bombs, improvised explosive devices, and mortar attacks.
As Rachel would write,
"We're constantly under fire. Last night we were shot at by 2 men stealing trucks. Oh well, we're alive."
when the Iraqi military was disbanded by the United States, 250,000 Iraqi men were out of a job, and they promptly looted the unguarded Iraqi bases, grabbing all kinds of guns and explosive devices.
Saboteurs destroyed the water main. The Jordanian embassy was destroyed by a car bomb. A hand grenade was thrown into the Turkish embassy. The electrical grid was targeted. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights was killed in a car bomb attack.
It was obviously just incredibly dangerous, and the casualties came quick. Zach's friend Todd's Humvee was attacked by insurgents. He was shredded with shrapnel, shot in the leg, his right hand nearly torn off, his rotor cuff gone. He managed to survive, but the Iraqi police officer he was patrolling with was killed.
Rachel's Humvee was hit by an RPG and it exploded, but somehow she was able to escape from the flaming vehicle. She wouldn't be so lucky the next time, for on October 26th, she was killed in a mortar attack when a piece of shrapnel pierced her heart.
Rachel Bosveld, an aspiring tattoo artist, only 19 years old, was the first military police officer to die in combat in Iraq, and the first fatality from the 527th MP Company.
The loss devastated Zach. He and Rachel were very close, the ones who entertained the others.
As one member, Larry, would say, "At first Zach was happy-go-lucky, then he was just depressed."
On July 28th, Zach was promoted from specialist to sergeant, and in November, Zach returned back to Gießen, Germany. His unit were all terribly disillusioned. As one member of the 527th would later say,
"I was so pissed when I came back. Iraq was in the exact same place when we arrived, if not worse. I felt like it was all going to hell in a handbasket."
Lena says she immediately noticed a change in Zach. He wasn't the same. As she'd say, quote, "He was different. There was a disconnect. Part of him wasn't back. There was an emptiness. There were times when I felt like I had him back all the way, but those did not last long. It became harder and harder to find the man I had fallen in love with and the man I wanted to spend my life with."
He was quiet, withdrawn, brooding. The wife of another soldier said,
"They returned desensitized toward life and scarily racist. They hated Arabs and wished they were all dead."
Zach was incensed when it was declared in January 2004 that weapons of mass destruction would not be found in Iraq, calling his mother and angrily saying, "Mom, this war is a joke."
He then began to purposely fail his Army physical fitness tests, which caused him to be removed from the Order of Merit lists. He just refused to do the required number of push-ups, though it was clear he was able.
Again in May, April, and June, he failed his physical tests and thereby wasn't able to attend primary leadership developmental courses and was put in Category 4, the lowest category in the Order of Merit list.
He was purposely trying to get himself kicked out of the Army, but he didn't tell Lena that's what he was up to. Lena later saying, "Zach was acting very strange and secretive. I knew there was a change in his schedule, but I didn't know exactly what was going on. Things started not adding up."
In the autumn of 2004, Zack was removed from the military under Chapter 13 for unsatisfactory performance.
Since Zack had risen through the ranks, going from private to sergeant, served in 2 combat zones, Kosovo and Iraq, and received several medals and awards, including a Good Conduct Medal, Kosovo Campaign Medal, and a Presidential Unit Citation for having performed an extremely meritorious act in the face of an armed enemy, his company commander recommended an honorable discharge.
But he ended up not receiving an honorable discharge and was instead given a general or less than honorable discharge, which means he and his family would lose their health insurance, which is the reason he joined to begin with. He'd also lose his education benefits, life insurance, home loan guarantees, and everything else that made him want to join the military.
Zack kept it all a secret and just announced to Lena one day,
"We're out of the military."
Lena says, "I was livid. We had started a life in the military so that Zack wouldn't have to bartend and I wouldn't have to strip. I told Zack, we're done."
Zack lied to his mother and told her he was discharged for medical reasons.
Chapter 6. Back in the Crescent City.
When they got back to New Orleans, they lived separately at first, and Lena immediately started dating other men. But after a while, they hooked back up and got an apartment together. But it was rocky and tumultuous at best. Both seemed to know the relationship was not going to last.
In the spring of 2005, Zack got a job bartending at the Hog's Breath Saloon on Chartres Street in the French Quarter.
This place sounds wild as hell. It was open 24 hours a day. There were bras hanging from the ceiling. It was run down and there was no beer on tap, just bottles. And no name brand liquor. Just the cheapest stuff that is said to have been mixed with flat Coca-Cola. It was supposedly a favorite with the transgender strippers who danced at the clubs next door.
Zack worked the graveyard shift from 2 until 10 in the morning, at which point another bartender would take over. A 29-year-old short blonde girl with large wild eyes and a chip on her shoulder, named Addie.
Addie was a true bohemian and French Quarter character, a poet, dancer, and seamstress. Zack was immediately obsessed with her.
New Orleans has a rich culture of artists, musicians, and writers, from Louis Armstrong to Fats Domino. Truman Capote was born there. Tennessee Williams would make it his home and set many of his plays there, including Streetcar Named Desire, where the character Blanche DuBois would sum up the spirit of the city by saying, "I don't want realism, I want magic."
In 1947, Roy Brown recorded a wild mix of gospel and blues he called Good Rockin' Tonight in the Big Easy, basically inventing rock and roll there, especially after the song was covered up in Memphis in 1954 by a young fellow named Elvis Presley.
And of course, there's Anne Rice. We can't forget her. And so many others who found inspiration there in that strange city by the Crescent Bend in the Mississippi.
Zack, who adored the crazy culture of New Orleans, saw Addie as a French Quarter princess. She seemed to know everyone and impressed them all with her heartfelt poetry.
Addie saw Zack as a dumb surfer guy from California. She wasn't impressed. She hated how he tried to schmooze customers by showing them stupid magic and card tricks, thought he was corny and acted like a preppy frat guy, the antithesis to her artistic free spirit persona.
But Zack was persistent, buying her shots, getting her talking, charming her with that boyish grin of his, regaling her with his time in the Middle East, and she slowly warmed to him, and the two became a couple.
Zach and Addie were in love.
Chapter 7. Addie.
Listen for me in a violin. Listen for me when the knife is turning. Listen for me when the world is burning. Babe, would you listen for me? Listen for me in a crowded street. Listen for me in a winning streak. Listen for me when you're at your peak. Babe, would you listen for me? Listen for me in a child's power. Listen for me in a gold.
Adrienne M. Hall, or Addie as she was affectionately known, was born January 15, 1976 in North Carolina. Her father was a Vietnam vet, her mother a homemaker.
We really don't know too much about Addie. Unlike Zack, his family came forward to defend him after his death, giving copious interviews. Addie's family never did speak up. In fact, they wouldn't even claim her body for 6 months.
We know that she was physically and sexually abused from a young age, so severely that she was hospitalized when she was just 12. She eventually dropped out of high school, and twice she attempted suicide.
I found some of her high school friends talking about her on Reddit, but they didn't have too much to say, just that she was beautiful, an artist, poet, free spirit. But I did find a close friend of hers from New Orleans, writer and playwright Dennis Mann, talking about her on Risk, a podcast where people get up on stage and tell crazy stories.
Dennis said he first saw her when she was living in her car, parked in the French Quarter, and as he walked by, he happened to glance inside right when she was changing her clothes. And she was naked, and they awkwardly made eye contact.
She gave him an angry glare as she pulled on a wife beater, but then, seeing his obvious shock and embarrassment, jumped out and introduced herself, as well as her breasts, saying her left breast was named Nippolata and her right Lactatia. Dennis saying, "Well, it's nice to meet you all."
That's great. Dennis was gay, which he says made Addie feel safe and secure around him. He wasn't going to try to pull any moves on her. She could trust him. Dennis says,
She was running from something, escaping something horrible from her life, escaping demons. But no matter how far she ran, those demons were right there, and they were unpredictable.
Dennis invited her to stay at his apartment on St. Peter Street while she got herself situated and settled in the Big Easy, and the two became roommates and very close friends, hitting the bars together.
Dennis says Addie's motto was, "Die young and leave a beautiful corpse." And she loved John Waters, the Pope of Trash. I adore him as well. And when he came to town to display his photography at the Arthur Roger Gallery, she gave him a copy of Catcher in the Rye to sign, which she just happened to have in her pocket. And he said, "Oh, the most popular book among degenerates and criminals."
Addie was a hard worker and had a multitude of jobs. She worked as a waitress, a bartender, and a maid at the French Quarter Wedding Chapel on Burgundy Street.
That winter, Dennis brought her a Christmas tree, and she broke down in tears, saying it was the first Christmas tree she'd ever had, which says a lot about her childhood.
But Addie had a dark side. She could be morose and depressed, moody, and she had a violent nature that came out when she drank. As Dennis would say,
a good time could go really bad, really fast.
When she was drinking, she would lash out and be abusive toward everybody. She'd get drunk and call Dennis gay slur words, could be really mean and nasty, which deeply hurt him.
Addie eventually moved into 1012 Governor Nicholas Street, between Burgundy and North Rampart Streets, an apartment in a ramshackle Creole cottage on the outskirts of the French Quarter.
Even though the place was tiny and a dump, she couldn't afford the rent and went through a litany of roommates, including a guy named Rob Van Meter, who worked with her at an Italian restaurant called the Mona Lisa.
Rob describes the little apartment they shared like this.
It was evil. One of the few houses on Governor Nichols that hadn't been renovated, hadn't been touched at all. It was just disgusting. There was no stove, no kitchen, no heating or air conditioning. Addie would cook on an electric skillet.
And about Addie, Rob says,
she had no problem giving people the finger or starting fights. That's why I liked her. I guess I'm kind of like that a little bit. When she drank, she would get this evil look in her eye. It would just be nasty.
Addie would let cocaine dealers use the place to bag up their product in exchange for some lines. Once suggesting to him that they rob one of the dealers because she felt they'd stiffed her on her cut.
Rob says, quote, "That's the first time where I thought, whoa, she is crazy."
Things eventually got so out of control that Rob moved out.
Sadly, Addie seemed drawn to abusive men. The mix of personalities, a violent cocktail. She dated a buggy driver for a while, but when she found gay porn and a dildo, she drunkenly confronted him over it, slapping him across the face with the dildo.
He broke her jaw and put her in the hospital.
Addie began dating a guy named Capriccio de Vallis. Capriccio loved Addie's free spirit and her artistic ways. She'd read him poetry and taught him ballroom and salsa dancing. But he couldn't handle her dark side, saying,
she would mentally turn any man that she was with into an abuser. She would see him as the enemy. Women who experience abuse often turn men that they are with into the figures of abuse. There was no way we could survive a relationship because of the damage she had received. But I knew that I never wanted to lose contact with her.
That seems a strange thing to say. Turn any man into an abuser? Is that like a weird excuse? Like, was he abusive to her?
No, I don't think that she would not that he was abusive to her, but she would like kind of try to make them abusive. I mean, everyone said that she was very violent and very aggressive.
Interesting.
And I don't even know how to describe it, but like she would, like, if she was with somebody, she would want them almost to abuse her, or try to get them to abuse her, or try to egg them on to abuse her, and then also see them as an abuser and like be mean to them, because like she would be mean to them because she saw all men as abusers, probably.
Yeah. Well, Addie and Capriccio agreed to just be friends, but close friends, and would remain so until the end. She liked to say they were in the same tribe. And Addie saw things on a tribal level. All of these tribes of the French Quarter.
They were often referred to as quarter rats, but Addie called themselves Puerto Ricans.
And then along came Zack, and as the two free spirits began to bond out in the Caribbean, lightning storms began to circle around a distant place of low pressure, causing hot, humid air to rise up from the sea in a violent spiral of thunder. Wind and storm clouds forming a tropical depression over the southeastern Bahamas, then quickly becoming a tropical storm named Katrina.
Chapter 8. Rock Me Like a Hurricane. Zach ended up spending so much time at the Hog's Breath Saloon after work, flirting with Addie as she bartended, that he was eventually banned when he wasn't on shift. But It all worked out, for eventually Addie fell for him.
They made an interesting couple. She was short, just over 5 foot, and he was 6'10". But in many ways, their opposites complemented each other. While Addie was known to be fiery and ornery, Zack was known to be very mellow, sweet, and chill.
Addie was known to start fights. Zack was known to walk away from fights, even when someone swung at him. He just didn't like trouble and avoided it.
Zack was a musician, loved playing guitar or pounding out a beat on the drums. Addie was a dancer who loved to lose herself to music. A seemingly perfect match.
On August 25th, the winds in Tropical Storm Katrina reached speeds over 74 miles per hour, making it a hurricane. Two hours later, it slammed into Florida, weakening as it passed over land, and again becoming a tropical storm. But after traveling over Florida and entering the Gulf of Mexico, the storm regained power, again becoming a hurricane.
By August 27th, the winds had reached speeds well over 110 miles per hour, making Katrina a Category 3 hurricane, headed straight towards New Orleans.
Lena called Zack in a panic, asking him what he was going to do. He calmly told her he was going to ride out the storm with Addie in her Governor Nicholas Street apartment.
Lena was furious. He was just going to leave her to deal with their 2 small children alone in her West Bank apartment. She begged him to come stay with her, saying, "Please just come over here and be with the kids. Bring Addie, I don't care."
Zack was adamant he wasn't going, saying, quote, "Y'all gonna be fine," which seems to suggest that he had gotten a bit of Southern accent during his many years in Louisiana. Dropped the California dude with a Southern y'all.
Lena would later say, "Of course we weren't going to be fine. No one was."
On Sunday, August 28th, Katrina was upgraded to a Category 4, then a Category 5. The National Hurricane Center saying it was going to be one of the worst hurricanes in history. And on Sunday morning, Mayor Nagin ordered a mandatory evacuation, and the National Weather Service issued a bulletin saying that anyone without shelter would face certain death.
Hundreds of thousands of people began streaming out of New Orleans as the storm grew closer. 18,000 folks an hour.
The Louisiana Superdome was opened as a, quote, refuge of last resort, end quote, for those residents that were unable to obtain safe transport out of the city, and tens of thousands began gathering there.
Meanwhile, Zach and Addie hit the Hog's Breath Saloon, commandeering, as they put it, a nice euphemism for stealing, copious amounts of liquor, beer, and ice, as if getting ready for a party.
Across town, Lena bought canned food and bottled water, prepared to hunker down with Jackson and Lily. I'm not really sure why she stayed. She could have left. It was a mandatory evacuation. It's pretty dangerous to put your kids through something like that.
Yeah, no kidding. Ugh. As it traveled toward Louisiana, Katrina became the strongest hurricane ever recorded in the Gulf of Mexico at that time.
That night, 110-mile-per-hour winds whipped through New Orleans, and a 9-foot storm surge entered the Industrial Canal by the 110 bridge, causing both levees to fail.
At 6 in the morning on Monday, August 29th, 2005, Katrina made landfall in Burris, Louisiana.
A half an hour later, all the power in New Orleans went out. Meanwhile, levees were failing all over the city. At 7:45, the levees on the southern end of the industrial canal exploded from the pressure, sending 20 feet of water gushing into the lower Ninth Ward, destroying houses, knocking them off their foundations.
Then the levee in Lakeview was breached. Then the London Avenue Canal. Eventually, there were 53 levee breaks, and 80% of New Orleans was underwater. 80%.
If it keeps on raining, the levee gonna break. Everybody's saying this is the day only the Lord could make. That, of course, is a song by Memphis Minnie, recorded in 1929, later famously re-recorded by Led Zeppelin. The song should be in the public domain. Hopefully we can play it.
If it keeps on raining, the levee's going to break. If it keeps on raining, the levee's going to break. And the water gonna come and I have no place to stay. Well, all last night I sat on the levee and moaned. Well, all last night I sat on the levee and moaned, thinking about my baby and my happy home. If it keeps on raining, the levee's going to break. If it keeps on raining, the levee's going to break. And all these people have no place to stay. Now look here, mama, what am I to do? Now look here, mama, what am I to do? I ain't got nobody to care my trouble to. I worked on the levee, mama, both night and day.
As the water poured into New Orleans, 200,000 homes were destroyed, 81,000 businesses, 175 schools, and 6 major hospitals, and over 1,300 people were dead.
But the French Quarter, the original center of the city situated on high ground, was mostly unscathed. A few caved-in chimneys and uprooted trees, but none of the flooding. It wasn't the hurricane that destroyed New Orleans. It was the levees failing.
By 2 o'clock, the storm had fully passed over New Orleans and the sun came out. But there was no electricity, very little food and water. So for those who did stick out the storm, most had no choice and were now evacuating, or trying to.
But not Zach and Addie. They weren't going anywhere. Relying on their survivalism instincts, they made campfires from tree limbs and old mattresses, fashioned fly swatters out of paper plates, and began cleaning the streets of trash and branches.
In the evening, they'd sit around a rickety wooden table on folding chairs, making cocktails and serving dinners of canned beans and soup to the other holdouts, listening to a battered old battery-powered boombox.
It was incredibly romantic for them, their survivalism in the face of an apocalypse, blocking out the past, blocking out her sexual abuse and his PTSD from combat.
They met another holdout, Jack Jones, who'd been living in the French Quarter since 1977. He invited them to stay at his luxurious Chartres Street condo, which he had stocked to the gills with provisions, hundreds of gallons of drinking water, cases of canned food, bleach, a working satellite phone, even some good weed they'd roll up and smoke in the evening.
On Jack's sprawling balcony, he constructed an outdoor kitchen around his grill, and in the courtyard, he had an outdoor shower set up. Jack was so well provisioned that reporters would use his condo to file stories on his satellite phone.
Of course, while Zach and Addie bicycled around, holding hands, mixing cocktails, and making love right in the middle of the street, it was a nightmare world for many.
There were 30,000 folks holed up in and around the Superdome. Its roof partially ripped free from the hurricane. It was flooded. There was no power, no air conditioning. The plumbing failed. The walls were covered in blood and shit. The smell was said to be unbearable. Elderly folks were dying. A guy committed suicide right there by jumping off the upper level. And there were horrendous stories of rape and murders circulating, though most of these ended up to be unsubstantiated rumors.
And to make it all worse, the National Guard, fearing a riot, put up barbed wire barricades to separate themselves from the evacuees. They were caged like animals and kept from walking across the bridges by armed blockades.
Corpses littered the streets, stuffed in shopping carts and left to rot. Looters and gangs roamed. Jack says,
We didn't see cops for about 6 days, and when the cops did come by, they asked if we had weapons because they were being overrun.
One night, Zach and Addie headed to a local supermarket called Roberts to rummage for supplies.
Zack stayed guard out front while Addie went in with a backpack.
It was pitch dark in the store as she roamed the looted, smashed aisles, when a figure came leaping out of the darkness, throwing her down to the ground, and attempted to rape her.
She managed to fight him off and get out of the store, but she was badly shaken.
Addie would say it was nothing. She was tough. She was fine. But both Jack and Zach could see she wasn't. And later, watching a swarm of green flies land on a package of hamburger meat, she broke down and started crying uncontrollably.
Two bars remained open after the storm, both running around the clock. Molly's at the market on Decatur Street and Johnny Witt's on Bourbon Street.
At Johnny Witt's, a guy named Greg Rogers was tending bar, but everyone knew him as Squirrel, a nickname he'd received from none other than Bono from U2 when he was a roadie on the band's Zoo TV tour. Like Zack, Squirrel was a combat veteran as well, having been a medical corpsman in Afghanistan, and he became very friendly with Zach and Addie.
Squirrel also happened to sell cocaine, and supplied Zach and Addie with a good amount of the party powder whenever they needed it.
But the strange party was coming to an end. The army was brought in to assist the National Guard, and the 82nd Airborne marched through the streets of New Orleans in full combat gear, triggering Zach's PTSD and feelings of failure.
New Orleans fell into martial law as police from as far away as Oregon and Michigan came rolling into the city, as well as private soldiers from Blackwater draped in automatic weapons.
By the evening of September 4th, the Superdome was completely evacuated, and Mayor Nagin signed a promulgation of emergency order directing the police, fire department, and military to evacuate all people from the city, whether they were on private property or not.
Addie and Zach were furious, considered themselves heroes of sorts for staying and cleaning the streets and feeding folks. Addie told the St. Petersburg Times, "They can't do this. I'm an American citizen. They're saying I have no rights."
They resisted, wearing t-shirts reading, "Restore the French Quarter," and law enforcement was sympathetic. U.S. Army Captain Sherrill saying, "We're keeping in mind that these people are still American, and they still have the same inalienable rights as any American."
Eventually, the order was rescinded, and on September 19th, the mayor announced residents could return to New Orleans, and everything changed. The wild apocalypse party was over.
Chapter 9. Post-Katrina. After the hurricane, Zach and Addie were more in love than either of them had ever been. Zach called his mom and told her that Addie was his soulmate and that he'd never been in love before. This was it, the big one.
But reality was pouring in like the water that breached the levees. They had to start working again, and Lena was irate that Zach had abandoned his parental responsibilities and hadn't paid any child support.
Lena and Jackson and Lily had ended up at a shelter and were then evacuated 6 hours away to Sugar Land, Texas, where Lena had to get a job working as a waitress in Applebee's to support the kids.
And Zach hadn't returned any of her numerous calls and texts, leading her to believe he was dead.
When Lena finally made it back to New Orleans, she went to Addie's apartment with a baseball bat, banging on the door with the bat, demanding Zach come out and explain himself.
But Zach wasn't there. It was just Addie, who didn't answer the door and was a little more than freaked out to see Zach's wife banging on the door with a baseball bat.
And yeah, they were still married. They never did get divorced.
So now there's a lot of bad blood brewing, and sadly 2 innocent children are in the middle of it.
Addie got a job at the Spotted Cat Jazz Club, and Jack delivered groceries at Matassa's Market.
New Orleans has a culture of bicycle delivery, folks getting anything delivered from cigarettes and beer to some cocaine and weed, Valium and ecstasy. It was all part of the bohemian New Orleans French Quarter traditions Zach embraced.
Zach and Addie began seeing everyone who'd fled the city as posers, and more felt they were some kind of French Quarter royalty for having never fled and stuck it out. In their minds, they'd proven themselves.
That winter, their friend Squirrel was short of money, couldn't pay rent, so Zach and Addie pitched in and gave him $900.
And from then on, whenever they wanted a 20 bag of blow or two, Squirrel would give it to them on the house, whipping the post-Katrina party into a cocaine-fueled frenzy.
As the spring of 2006 came blooming, they were partying hard every night, and this brought back Addie's spells, her dark cloud of anger and moodiness, and they began to drunkenly fight.
One day, they woke up. Both of them were covered in bruises and abrasions, having physically fought, both completely blacked out, and neither remembering what had even happened. And Zach decided he couldn't take it anymore and hopped on a train to Oregon to see his father.
But he ached to be back in New Orleans. He'd fallen in love with the culture and lifestyle, and also his children were there.
Yeah, very sadly, Lena would be telling the kids that the reason they never saw their father was because he was rebuilding the levees for the Red Cross. Fucking sad.
And when Lena found out Zach was in Oregon, she lost it and berated him for abandoning them yet again. So he turned right back around and headed back to the Big Easy. Just couldn't stay away.
And when he got back, he promptly headed to the Governor Nicholas apartment and into the drunken arms of Addie Hall.
The two then engaged in a full-on bender of sex and drugs and didn't leave the apartment for days.
And they were right back where they started. Addie spinning out of control, lashing out at everyone, lashing out at the world, attacking Zach, attacking their friends. They'd break up and then tearfully reunite, having passionate make-up sex fueled by cocaine and alcohol, then break up again. A vicious cycle. Zach crashing at their friend Squirrel's pad so often that he set himself up a little cot in the corner.
Addie was out of control, and wandering in the streets one night, drunk and high out of her mind, got into a fight with a random guy on Bourbon Street and pulled a gun on him, getting herself arrested. And Zach refused to pay her bail, letting her rot in prison for weeks while she pleaded with friends to pool their money together and get her out.
That's cold, yo. Cold. Then Zach got arrested for weed, and Addie totally put up his money for bail. She may have been mean and crazy, but she was loyal.
Chapter 10, The Downward Spiral. At some point, Zach went to one of the many tattoo parlors in New Orleans and got "Fuck It All, No Regrets" tattooed across his gut.
A line from Damage Incorporated by Metallica. Kick-ass song. This isn't talked about much, but Zach was also getting into crystal meth, which I think has a lot to do with what would eventually happen, because meth just brings on total psychosis and madness.
Zach was also bisexual, and while it was something he wasn't open about and kept hidden from Addie, he did hang out at gay bars and occasionally dated men. New Orleans does have a vibrant and thriving gay culture, something that often draws folks to the city.
And apparently, there was this gay methamphetamine dealer who was notorious for trading speed for sexual favors. And one day, Addie came home to find Zach being fucked from behind by this guy, and apparently really freaked her out. Zach had not only cheated on her, but he hadn't been honest and open about his sexuality either.
Addie was pissed and mean as hell and would taunt Zach with gay slurs, say shit in front of his friends like, quote, "Well, it would be nice to have sex with a straight man one of these days."
At one point, she stole his cell phone, called all the women in his phone book, telling them that he was gay and had AIDS, and then deleted their numbers.
Yet, they still persisted as a couple.
In October, the toilet stopped working. The little apartment was literally falling apart. It had always been a shithole, but after Katrina, it was even worse than ever.
So they decided to find a new place, finding a "For Rent" sign on the wrought iron gate of 826 North Rampart Street, a 2-story Creole cottage built in 1829, right above the priestess Miriam Chamani's voodoo spiritual temple. So, New Orleans.
Zach was excited and put up all his money. And in true bohemian fashion, the owner, one-time mayoral candidate Leo Watermeyer, took their cash and handed them the keys without a lease or a credit check.
Just a day later, though, Addie showed up at his office, demanding he write her a lease in her name, which he did, handwriting it on a yellow legal pad.
Addie told the landlord,
"I caught him cheating on me with a man."
He told her he didn't want to get involved in their drama. Smart move.
She then went back to the apartment and kicked Zach out, as she was now the sole name on the lease.
Ooh, cold. So cold, dude.
Zach had nowhere to go, was facing being homeless, not to mention the humiliation. He'd bragged to Lena about his new place, saying he'd now start seeing the kids more often.
Humiliated and desperate, he pleaded with Addie, but she just laughed in his face, mocked him, called him gay slurs. He screamed back at her. They fought angrily, physically, and then the 6'10" combat veteran wrapped his fingers around the throat of little 5-foot poet Addie and squeezed the life from her.
As he would say in his written confession,
she would not shut the fuck up, so I calmly strangled her.
Chapter 11. After Addie.
There's a lot of sympathy out there for Zach. People cite all kinds of excuses for why he killed Addie. His PTSD, Addie's violent temper. One of the biggest true crime podcasts out there even said Zack was as much a victim as Addie. But for me, personally, my opinion, that's total bullshit. He could have left. He could have just walked out. He didn't have to fucking kill her. He had parents who would have helped him and supported him. He had a million options. But he decided to kill his girlfriend.
And he was no angel. He'd abandoned his first wife and children in the literal face of a hurricane when they needed him the most. He didn't pay his child support. He was a drunk and a druggie and prostituting himself for meth. Many of Addie's friends describe him as creepy and weird.
And then there's what he did with her corpse.
He says in his own words that he, quote, sexually defiled the body a few times.
He's a fucking monster. Even in a crime of passion, you think he'd realize what he'd done afterwards and fall into remorse, not sexually assault the body. Fuck. And even writing his confession was an act of desecration because he put it in Addie's journal, which is to me a further sign of defiling and dominating her. It's not only her property that he's defacing, he's literally taking over the narrative, taking control of her story in her journal.
Yeah, that is so very true. And after murdering his girlfriend and sexually assaulting her corpse, Zach Bowen calmly went to work and told everyone he and Addie had broken up and she'd moved back to North Carolina.
Which left a few puzzled. Addie often talked about moving away, but always to places like Morocco or Bali, never back to North Carolina, which was a place she'd spent her life trying to escape from.
One friend says he immediately wondered if Zach had killed Addie. After work, Zach went back to the apartment, and in Zach's own written words,
I came home, moved the body to the tub, got a saw, and hacked off her feet, hands, and head. Put her head in the oven after giving it an awful haircut. Put her hands and feet in a pot of water on the range. I had plenty of time to work, but due to laziness, spent most of that time coked up in various bars with different girls.
Zach spent the next day, Sunday, with his children and wife. Lena says he was in a happy, generous mood. He gave her $600 and bought Jackson and Lily all the candy they wanted.
Zach then told Lena he'd take the kids the next weekend and not to worry about Addie. She'd moved out and he had the new apartment all to himself.
Zach then returned home to his apartment, where he says,
I sawed off the rest of her legs and arms and put them in roasting pans, stuck them in the oven and passed out. I came to 7 hours later with an awful smell emanating from the kitchen. I turned off the oven and went to work.
And I guess we should state it's believed he was cooking her not to eat her, but in order to help strip the flesh off her bones and dispose of her body. And the seasoning was to mask the smell. There were no actual signs of cannibalism.
Neighbors would later say,
We noticed a funny odor, but we didn't think anything of it. Everything smells in New Orleans.
It had now been 3 days since Zach murdered, dismembered his girlfriend. And, as he'd write, I scared myself, not by the action of strangling the woman I've loved for 1.5 years, but by my entire lack of remorse. I've known forever how horrible a person I am. Ask anyone. So I decided to quit my job and spend the $1,500 in cash I had, being happy, and then kill myself.
So he hit the strip clubs, guzzling whiskey, snorting cocaine and speed, throwing down hundreds for lap dances, charming one dancer at the Hustler Club on Bourbon Street, who took him back to her place for 2 days of wild sex and drugs.
Realizing it was his 8th wedding anniversary, he drunkenly called Lana and asked to meet. She was dismissive. And then he told her, hey, I want to party with my favorite stripper. she hung up on him.
Many, including Lena herself, believe if she'd met him, he'd have killed her too.
He took a can of spray paint and scrawled, "I am a total failure," across the wall. And in the bedroom, above the bed, painted, "Please stop the pain," right in the place his eyes would see when he opened them in the morning. It had now been over a week since the murder. Zack kept the air conditioner blasting on high, trying to slow decomposition. The place like a crypt.
Zack lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply, getting the cherry glowing red hot, then burned himself over his body 28 times, once for each year of his life, before sitting down with Addie's diary and scrawling a rambling confession, ending with,
"Had a fantastic time living out my last days. Good food, good drugs, good strippers. Fuck it all, and no fucking regrets."
He then spray painted a command to "look in the oven" on the wall, with a large arrow pointing to the stove.
He put his military dog tags, which are used to identify a soldier after death, in a Ziploc bag with a short suicide note, stuffing it in his pocket, grabbed a couple of bags of cocaine from Squirrel, and headed to the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel.
After having a few drinks by the pool, a place he'd often frequented with Lena, Jackson, and Lily, he strolled to the roof railing and threw himself off, plunging to his death.
And so goes the tragic tale of Addie and Zack. But it doesn't end there. Oh, no. This is New Orleans. Of course, it gets weirder and weirder and weirder and weirder.
Chapter 12. Jaron Lockhart.
Well, darling, my bones are aching from overuse and strain. And day by day I've been losing my brain, and I have less and less to say to you. Well, darling, my bones are weak, and my legs are too tired to run, and my scrawny frame, it calls out your name, but I'm already deaf, blind and dumb. So darling, wave goodbye to this place, just like a monkey being shot in his face, with a bit of luck and an empty cup and a tear rolling down your face, darling. You belong to me.
On June 7th, 2012, in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, as workers pumped sand onto a local beach, they made a horrifying discovery. A human torso had washed ashore.
In the days that followed, clothing and more body parts were discovered along the Mississippi beaches, including portions of 2 legs and a head, many of which had patches of skin that had been methodically removed, leading police to believe the body had been dismembered to hide the victim's identity.
Indeed, the killers had removed identifying marks from the body, but they missed one tattoo hidden on the back of her head, and the body was identified as 22-year-old Jaron Lockhart, a single mother and exotic dancer from New Orleans, over an hour away.
Surveillance video obtained from the club where Lockhart worked revealed she was last seen leaving in the early morning hours of June 6th with a couple who were quickly identified.
And the woman was none other than one of Addie's best friends, Margaret Sanchez.
Margaret, one of the Puerto Ricans, or French Quarter Rats, as Addie called her tribe, was interviewed after Addie's murder by numerous television stations and was even featured in a documentary called Zach and Addie, where she cried and wept over the loss of her best friends in the whole world.
On June 6th, Margaret was out and about, hitting all the strip clubs in the Big Easy with this utter scumbag of a guy named Terry Speaks, who lived over in Kenner, Louisiana. First they went to Stilettos, asking about a threesome and wanting a private party. Then they went to Temptations, where they ran into Jaren Lockhart, telling her they were looking for strippers to bring to a bachelor's party.
Jaren was a very, very pretty girl with a punk look. Hair dyed magenta, a lip ring, lots of tattoos. She was a single mom who'd fallen on hard times and was living in a hotel room with her boyfriend. She was just desperate to make some real money so she could find a better place to live. She agreed to go with them.
A waitress at the club actually asked Jaren if she was sure it was safe to go with them, and she told her that she didn't know when she'd have the opportunity to make this much money again, and didn't want to lose it.
But there was no bachelor party. Instead, she was stabbed in the chest, chopped into pieces, and dumped over a bridge into the Mississippi River, where her body parts washed up on beaches along the Gulf Coast.
Rumors that Margaret and Terry were involved in the occult and had planned the murder to align with certain spiritual beliefs swirled.
When a reporter asked Margaret about the killing, she denied any knowledge of it, pleading her innocence and saying,
I feel so bad for her family because I had a friend. My friend was Addie Hall, and she was cut up and was cooked, and her boyfriend jumped off a hotel.
But, faced with mounting evidence of her guilt, she'd eventually change her story and plead guilty.
In 2015, Terry Speaks was found guilty of second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to obstruct justice in the death of Jaren Lockhart. He was sentenced to life in prison. Margaret Sanchez was found guilty of manslaughter, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison.
And to top off the weirdness and true spooky, Big Easy, gothic macabreness, now Zach and Addie are a permanent part of the ghostly lore of New Orleans. They are a feature of many of the ghost tours, including the Killers and Thrillers tour, which passes right by the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel, where Zack plunged to his death.
And the apartment itself is now a ghost museum run by one Bloody Mary Milan, who describes herself as a voodoo priestess that can communicate and heal the spirits of the dead. Yes, you can go right into the apartment where the stove that held her head, legs, feet, and hands is on display, as well as the ghastly refrigerator that held her torso.
I know that to love is to love. I roll immaculate and stone. A home bum's cry.
Yeah, many have slammed the museum as being exploitative, including Zach's family. But Addie's good friend Dennis Mann, the playwright she first lived with in New Orleans, says Addie would love that the place of her murder is now a ghost museum. He says she would adore it all. And as for the rumors of her ghosts haunting the French Quarter, Dennis says he hopes it's true, that she was a French Quarter goddess, and he hopes her spirit remains.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Addie Hall and Zachary Bowen. We hope you've enjoyed it.
Ça c'est bon. I want to give a big shout out to some of the amazing musicians and bands we featured this week. First, the amazing Mikey Massacre. If you like punk and metal, definitely give Mikey Massacre a listen. And of course, my good friend Chris Jeffries, the homeless romantic, show favorite Halizna, the Nolans Funk of Unicorn Heads, and Audio Natrix. There's links to all of them in the show notes. Check them out. And do you have a case you'd like us to cover? Let us know at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. Laissez les bon temps rouler. Let the good times roll.
It never was. Oh, it never was. It never was. It never was.